Hey everyone. Today we step into a battlefield where even the snow turned red before the world could look away. Roads weren't highways anymore. They were swamps of frozen corpses and broken tanks. Soldiers didn't march with pride. They crawled through mud so deep it swallowed horses whole. You won't hear of easy victories or parades here, only the whine of Katyusha rockets echoing like demons. The crack of rifles in trenches dug by children, and the silence of villages erased beneath fire and frost. This isn't about neat arrows on a map or Hitler's speeches in Berlin. It's about German soldiers freezing to death in their sleep. Soviet civilians digging graves before the battle even began. And generals raging at maps that couldn't stop the mud. If you want unflinching stories of survival, sacrifice, and the moment when Blitzkrieg finally broke, hit like and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me, where are you watching from, and what memory of winter still chills your bones? Now steady yourself and follow me into the Battle of Moscow, where an empire's dreams froze solid and a nation's will refused to die. You stand there, a silent observer in the early morning chill of October 7th, 1941. The air holds that particular scent of autumn, crisp and earthen. But beneath it, a metallic tang of anticipation. The German 4th Panzer Division, once so confident, so unstoppable, rolls into the quiet town of Incense. You can almost hear the low rumble of their engines, a deep, mechanical growl that usually heralds swift victory. You might have been told this would be a march, a stroll through conquered lands, leading straight to Moscow. The early days of the campaign had built this belief, this almost unbreakable sense of destiny. But as you watch the panzers advance, you feel a subtle shift, a barely perceptible tension in the air, a whisper of something unseen. Then, the world shatters. From the dark, shadowed depths of the surrounding woods, the Soviet 4th Tank Brigade emerges. Not in a grand charge, but in a sudden, brutal ambush. Fire erupts, a startling, violent bloom of orange and red against the muted greens and browns of the trees. The sound is deafening, a cacophony of explosions, the sharp crack of heavy machine guns, and the piercing shriek of shells tearing through the autumn air. It's not the neat, choreographed dance of war you might have imagined. It's raw, chaotic, and utterly merciless. You see it all unfold with chilling clarity. 6 of the mighty panzers, those symbols of German might, are engulfed in flames. Their steel bodies, once formidable, now twist and buckle under the intense heat. Thick, acrid smoke billows into the sky, carrying with it the sickening smell of burning metal, oil, and something far more tragic. You hear the screams. They are not just the generic sounds of battle, but the distinct, agonizing cries of soldiers, trapped inside their burning steel coffins. It's a sound that clings to the air, a haunting echo that will not easily fade. 3 more panzers are heavily damaged, their movements crippled, their guns silenced. Dozens of German soldiers, who moments ago believed themselves invincible, now lie still, stark against the encroaching shadow. Incense, the small town that witnessed this brutal exchange, eventually falls into German hands. But the victory feels hollow, tainted by the unexpected ferocity of the defense. You sense the shift in morale, a tremor of unease rippling through the German ranks. The shock of those burning tanks, the screams of the trapped. It's a vision etched into their minds, and now into yours. You hear a German soldier mutter, his voice raw with disbelief and a bitter, dark humor. "We came for a picnic, turned into our own barbecue." It's a stark, unsettling joke, a coping mechanism for a horror that defied expectation. This was the first undeniable sign, a cold, hard truth whispered on the wind. Moscow would not be taken with a leisurely stroll. The path to victory, if it existed at all, would be paved with fire, and with far more blood than anyone had dared to imagine. You feel the weight of this realization, a heavy cloak settling over the optimism that once felt so certain. You remember, or perhaps you merely witness through the lens of history, the grand, almost theatrical beginning of Operation Barbarossa. It was June 22, 1941, a summer morning filled with an entirely different kind of light, a light that seemed to promise swift conquest. Nearly 3 million German troops, a vast, seemingly endless human tide, surged across the border into the Soviet Union. It was a monumental undertaking, a gamble of immense proportions, launched with a fierce and unwavering belief in its own success. You can almost feel the sheer momentum of that initial advance. The roaring engines, the endless columns of men and machines, a relentless force driving eastward. In those first weeks, the Red Army seemed to simply dissolve before this overwhelming power. You see, in your mind's eye, maps where the German arrows sliced through Soviet territory with horrifying ease. Hundreds of miles collapsing in a blink. The speed was dizzying, a true blitzkrieg, leaving behind a trail of shattered defenses and bewildered, broken units. There was an almost arrogant confidence in the air then, a sense of invincibility that permeated the German high command. Hitler himself had declared it, with a chilling intensity, a war of extermination against the Jewish Bolshevik state, framing it not just as a military campaign, but a crusade, an apocalyptic struggle against an ideological enemy. This rhetoric fueled the early ferocity, hardening the hearts of many soldiers convinced of their righteous cause. The Wehrmacht, in their early triumphs, firmly believed they would be back in Berlin before Christmas. You can almost hear the casual conversations, the plans for holiday leaves, the unquestioning assumption of a swift, decisive victory. This war, they thought, would be over before the deep snows arrived, a brief, glorious chapter in their nation's history. But even in these early days of overwhelming success, you are confronted with sights that whisper of a different, darker reality. You witness the endless columns of Soviet prisoners of war, a silent, shuffling river of humanity stretching for miles. They are starving, their eyes hollow with thirst, their bodies ravaged by forced marches and neglect. It's a spectacle of immense, quiet suffering, a stark counterpoint to the jubilant reports from the front. This shocking parade of misery, devoid of fanfare or celebration, became a grim reality for the German soldiers. You hear them, in hushed tones, sometimes with a grimace, sometimes with a forced indifference, refer to it as the silent parade with no music. The dark humor here is not lighthearted, but a coping mechanism for the profound desolation they were witnessing. A desperate attempt to distance themselves from the dehumanizing scale of suffering. This initial, overwhelming arrogance, born from swift victories and a belief in their own military superiority, was already planting the insidious seeds of failure. It was a hubris that would grow, taking root in the fertile soil of overconfidence, and ultimately would lead them to the frozen gates of Moscow, unprepared for the monstrous resilience they were about to face. You feel the weight of this historical irony, a calm understanding of how early triumphs can blind even the most formidable forces to the dangers lurking ahead. As the German war machine advanced, you shift your gaze to Moscow, a city that pulsed as the very heart of the Soviet Union. It was more than just a capital. It was the nerve center, the political brain where decisions echoed across the vast land, the logistical arteries through which all supplies flowed, and perhaps most profoundly, the spiritual core, a symbol of defiance and national identity. To lose Moscow, you instinctively understand, would be to sever the main artery, to collapse the entire Soviet system, sending ripples of despair and defeat across the largest country in the world. Its fall would not merely be a military setback, but an existential catastrophe. The very air in Moscow hummed with a different kind of tension, a desperate energy. You witness the remarkable fortitude of its leader, Joseph Stalin. Despite the grave danger, despite the whispers of evacuation for government and industry, he stood firm. His words, delivered with a grim resolve, echo in your mind, "I will remain in Moscow." This decision was not merely a political statement. It was a potent symbol, a rallying cry that reverberated through every street and home. His refusal to abandon the city instilled a powerful sense of purpose in its inhabitants, binding their fate to his and to the city itself. You see the city's transformation, no longer just a bustling metropolis. Moscow was slowly, deliberately, turning into a fortress. Its civilians, ordinary people going about their lives just weeks before, were now engaged in a colossal effort of defense. You watch them, men, women, and even children, working tirelessly. They prepare barricades in the streets, hauling lumber and stone, creating obstacles against the inevitable German advance. They dig shelters, burrowing into the earth, preparing safe havens from the bombs that would soon fall. It is a collective act of will, a quiet, determined defiance against the looming threat. Then come the air raids, the terrifying shriek of sirens cutting through the night, followed by the dull, concussive thud of bombs shaking the ground. You are there, witnessing the shock of it, the raw fear as the city trembles. You see civilians, seeking refuge, sleeping in the subway tunnels, their faces illuminated by the dim, flickering lights, the distant rumbling of bombs, a constant, unsettling lullaby. These underground passages, usually conduits for daily life, become temporary homes, sanctuaries carved beneath the earth. Amidst the fear and the dust, a peculiar, dark humor emerges, a testament to the human spirit's ability to find light in the darkest corners. Muscovites, with a wry, almost morbid wit, joke. We got 5-star underground hotels, just need the bombs as check-in bells. It's a way to cope, to reclaim a sliver of normalcy, to mock the terror that seeks to consume them. The capital, once a place of everyday life, had become a formidable fortress of survival, its heartbeat resolute, its people united in an unyielding stand against the encroaching darkness. You feel the profound sense of resilience, the unbreakable spirit that binds them all. You feel the turning of the season as September's last breath fades into the crisp air of October. On September 30th, 1941, an immense force, a truly staggering array of men and machinery, springs into motion. This is Operation Typhoon, Hitler's desperate, all-in gamble to seize Moscow. You sense the magnitude of this offensive, a final, concentrated push. Nearly 2 million men, a human river stretching across the landscape, are thrown into the fray. With them come 2,000 tanks, their steel treads churning the earth. A mechanical wave of destruction. Over 14,000 pieces of artillery stand poised, their barrels hungry for targets. And more than 1,000 aircraft darken the skies, their engines a buzzing symphony of war. The plan, as it unfolds before your mind's eye, is audacious in its simplicity, brutal in its execution. 2 massive pincers, like the claws of a titan, are designed to encircle Moscow, to snap shut around its vital arteries, cutting it off from the vast Soviet hinterland. The German High Command, still riding the wave of early victories, firmly believed this would be the knockout blow. They saw Moscow as the prize, and this offensive as the decisive strike that would bring the entire Soviet enterprise crashing down. You can almost hear the conviction in their voices, the certainty that this was the final, triumphant act. The maps, when viewed from this perspective, take on a chilling, almost predatory quality. You see the German arrows, meticulously drawn, like daggers poised to plunge into Moscow's very heart. Each line, each proposed advance, is a testament to calculated aggression, a vivid representation of their intent to conquer. There's a cold, clinical beauty to the strategic designs, a brutal efficiency that speaks volumes about the ambition driving this campaign. Yet, even as the operation begins, as the initial thrusts gain ground, you begin to perceive the first cracks in this grand design. The weather, that unpredictable, silent player in the theater of war, starts to stir. The autumn rains, which had been lurking on the horizon, begin to descend, softly at first, then with increasing persistence. You hear a soldier, perhaps one of the advance scouts, mutter with a grimace, observing the rapidly deteriorating conditions of the roads. Blitzkrieg, more like blitz mud. It's a quip born of frustration, but also of a dawning, terrible realization. The lightning war, designed for speed and maneuverability across firm ground, was about to meet its nemesis in the clinging, bottomless mire of the Russian autumn, despite these early, subtle warnings from the ground. Hitler, far removed from the deepening mud, continued to promise his people that victory was near. His words were filled with an unwavering certainty, echoing across the radio waves, assuring a swift and glorious conclusion. But you, standing witness to the creeping changes on the battlefield, understand that the nature of this war and the fate of this audacious gamble was about to be profoundly reshaped by forces far beyond human control. As Operation Typhoon gathered momentum in the early days of October, you are drawn to the vast, harrowing landscape around Vyazma and Bryansk. This was where the German pincers, so sharp and efficient on the maps, closed with devastating effect. You witness, with a detached but profound sense of dread, the sheer scale of the catastrophe that befell the Soviet armies. 7 of their armies, spread thinly, poorly equipped, and already battered from previous retreats, found themselves caught in immense, inescapable encirclements. These weren't mere skirmishes. They were vast, churning cauldrons of destruction. You can almost feel the ground vibrate with the relentless German advance, the thunder of their artillery, the relentless chatter of machine guns. The air is thick with the smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of fear. The Soviet soldiers, many of them reservists, some barely trained, fought with a desperate courage. But they were outflanked, outgunned, and relentlessly pressed from all sides. The initial confusion of the encirclement soon gave way to a harrowing struggle for survival. Pockets of resistance fighting to the last man, knowing that retreat meant certain capture or death. The numbers, when they eventually emerge from the chaos, are truly staggering, almost beyond comprehension for a single battle. Nearly 1 million Soviet troops were killed, wounded, or captured in these monstrous encirclements. You try to imagine such a vast multitude, a sea of human lives, simply erased or swept away in the span of a few weeks. Each one represents a story, a family, a dream extinguished. The fields and forests around Vyazma and Bryansk became vast, unintended graves, soaked in the blood of those who fought and fell. The cries of the wounded, the desperate pleas of the dying, the silence of the fallen, they all become part of the somber tapestry of this brutal chapter. The German advance, though successful in its encirclement, was not without its own heavy price. You sense the cost, the gradual erosion of their own strength, even as they celebrated the immense haul of prisoners and the clearing of a path towards Moscow. They were paying a steadily increasing toll. The ferocity of the Soviet resistance, however doomed, had taken its own bite out of the German forces. Each Soviet life lost bought precious hours, critical moments, even if it was just for a few more tanks to bog down, for a few more rounds of ammunition to be expended. The sheer scale of the slaughter here at Vyazma and Bryansk was meant to be the final clearing of the road, the definitive removal of any major obstacles before Moscow. Yet, even in this colossal victory, you begin to perceive the subtle, accumulating fatigue on the German side, a faint tremor of the exhaustion that would soon become their undoing. The path to Moscow was now seemingly open, but it was a path that had consumed an almost unimaginable quantity of human life, on both sides, and left an indelible scar on the land itself. Amidst the colossal tragedy of Vyazma and Bryansk, where nearly 1 million Soviet lives were extinguished or ensnared, a stark and chilling statistic emerges. Only about 90,000 soldiers, a mere fraction of the original force, managed to survive the encirclements. You might visualize them, these scattered remnants, a ghostly procession of exhausted, desperate men, somehow breaking through the German lines, making their way back towards a seemingly naked Moscow. They carried with them not just their remaining weapons, but the indelible scars of defeat, the silent screams of their fallen comrades, and a grim determination forged in the crucible of unimaginable loss. Their survival was a testament to individual courage and the sheer will to endure. Yet their numbers were terrifyingly small, leaving the capital seemingly vulnerable. Even for the victorious Germans, this massive success came at a significant cost, a price that began to erode their momentum. They, too, suffered losses. Approximately 50,000 men killed, wounded, or missing in the brutal fighting. Each loss was a soldier, a driver, a gunner, a vital cog in the well-oiled blitzkrieg machine. More crucially, the battles had consumed precious, irreplaceable weeks. Weeks that ticked by as the autumn turned colder, as the ground softened, as the calendar inexorably marched towards winter. Each day spent reducing the Vyazma and Bryansk cauldrons was a day less for the final push on Moscow, a day that General Mud and General Winter would claim for their own. You witness the aftermath of the encirclements, a sight that stretches beyond the horizon and into the depths of memory. Endless columns of prisoners, Soviet soldiers stripped of their dignity and their will, trudging forward, mile after mile. Their faces are etched with despair, their uniforms tattered, their eyes reflecting an emptiness that chills you to the core. This is not the proud march of an army, but a slow, agonizing procession of the defeated. A vast, silent testament to the scale of the German victory. It's a sight that demands silent reflection on the fragile nature of human existence in wartime. You hear the dark humor, again, a bitter attempt by German soldiers to process the overwhelming reality. They joke. The biggest parade in history without an audience. It's a chillingly apt description, capturing both the immense number of captives and the profound silence, the absence of any celebratory crowds. There's no glory in this spectacle, only a profound, almost dehumanizing sense of triumph. Moscow, you understand, now looked terrifyingly naked, stripped of much of its defending army. Yet, the German delay, the precious weeks spent on these encirclements, was perhaps the most costly prize of all. For every Soviet soldier lost, time was gained. Time for the earth to soften, for the rains to descend, for the cold breath of winter to creep closer, preparing the stage for the next, even more brutal act of this unfolding drama. You feel the subtle, yet powerful, shift in the narrative. A sense of an unseen force beginning to contend with the human players. As October deepens, you feel a palpable change in the air, a shift in the very character of the earth. The autumn rains, which had begun subtly, now descend with an unyielding persistence. You witness the landscape transforming, day by day, hour by hour. The once firm roads, the pathways that had so easily carried the German blitzkrieg, slowly, inexorably, turn into treacherous swamps. It's not just a little mud. It's a living, breathing entity, a thick, clinging monster that rises from the earth to consume all that attempts to cross it. This is Rasputitsa, the season of bad roads, a term that barely scratches the surface of its brutal reality. You see the effect on the mighty German war machine. Tanks, those formidable steel beasts, once so swift and powerful, now bogged down, their massive treads churning helplessly in the viscous muck. They become immobile islands of metal, vulnerable and frustrated, their forward momentum stolen by the earth itself. Horses, straining with all their might to pull supply wagons and artillery pieces, often flounder in the deeper mire, sometimes even drowning in the unexpected depths of the mud-choked roads. The exhaustion on their faces, and on the faces of the men trying to save them, is heartbreaking to behold. The soldiers, those who once marched with confident strides, now trudge forward, their boots sinking deep into the glutinous earth. You watch them, their faces grim, their legs heavy with the clinging weight, moving knee-deep through the relentless mud. Each step is an immense effort, a Herculean task that saps strength and morale. The squelch of their boots, the sucking sound of the mud, becomes the omnipresent soundtrack to their advance. It is a slow, agonizing grind, a stark contrast to the swift, decisive movements that had characterized the early days of the invasion. Makeshift corduroy roads are attempted, desperately constructed from felled trees, laid across the most impassable stretches. You see the immense effort involved. Soldiers cutting and laying logs, a desperate attempt to create a temporary, fragile bridge over the quagmire. But these efforts barely help, providing only fleeting relief before they too are swallowed by the relentless mud or crumble under the weight of heavy vehicles. The illusion of progress is fleeting, swallowed by the insatiable maw of the earth. You feel the profound frustration, the growing sense of helplessness, as the meticulously planned blitzkrieg, a strategy predicated on speed and overwhelming force, slows to an agonizing crawl, the very ground beneath their feet, once a pathway to victory, had become their most formidable, relentless enemy. The relentless grip of Rasputitsa tightens its hold, transforming the battlefield into a surreal landscape of bogged-down ambitions. You gaze upon sights that defy the very image of modern warfare. Panzers, those symbols of mechanized power, now lie half submerged in the deep, brown mud, their steel hulls caked and stained, resembling shipwrecks cast ashore on a shore of churned earth. Their guns are silent, their engines choked, their fearsome presence diminished to that of helpless, mired beasts. It's a profound visual metaphor for the slowing of the entire German war machine. A stark testament to the power of nature to bring even the most advanced technology to a grinding halt. You can almost feel the weight of the mud, a suffocating blanket covering everything. The frustration among the German soldiers is palpable, a thick cloud hanging over their exhausted ranks. You hear their bitter, desperate humor, a coping mechanism against the overwhelming reality. Curses and jests intertwine. "We don't need tanks," they grumble, their voices heavy with sarcasm. "We need boats." It's a stark admission of their predicament, an acknowledgement that the very tools designed for rapid advance were utterly useless in this new, aquatic landscape. The mud transforms every task into an ordeal, every kilometer into a journey of immense, draining effort. Supplies are difficult to move, ammunition runs low, and the relentless, energy-sapping struggle to simply exist consumes their focus, diverting their attention from the primary objective. You begin to understand, with a calm but clear certainty, that General Mud, this unseen and utterly unconquerable adversary, had become Moscow's first, most steadfast defender. This wasn't a general who issued commands or moved troops on a map. This was an elemental force, a primordial power that defied all strategy, all tactics, and all military might. It imposed its own pace, its own will, transforming the battlefield into a bog of attrition, precisely where the lightning-fast blitzkrieg was most vulnerable. The mud choked not just the vehicles, but the very spirit of the advance, dissolving the precision and speed that had been the hallmark of German success. As you reflect on this, you realize the immense, quiet power of such a force. It did not shed blood directly, but it created the conditions for a different kind of suffering, a slow, draining torture of morale and physical endurance. Each day spent mired in the mud was a day gained for Moscow, a day lost for the Germans. The calendar continued its relentless march, and with each passing moment, the breath of winter grew colder, promising an even more unforgiving adversary. The mud was paving the way, preparing the ground, not for German victory, but for something far more challenging and ultimately far more devastating for the invading forces. You feel the slow, inevitable turning of the tide, not by human design, but by the subtle, immense power of the land itself. As the German advance faltered in the suffocating embrace of the Rasputitsa, a new figure emerges, a man summoned with grim urgency to Moscow's defense. You witness the moment of decision, the desperate need for a firm hand. Stalin, understanding the dire straits the capital faced, recalled General Georgy Zhukov from Leningrad. Zhukov was a commander renowned for his unyielding resolve, his ruthless pragmatism, and his utter contempt for defeat. His arrival in Moscow was not just a change in leadership. It was a declaration of unbending will, a clear sign that the fight for the capital would be waged with every last ounce of Soviet strength, no matter the cost. Zhukov's first, immediate task was to shore up the collapsing defenses. You envision the frantic, desperate work as he oversaw the construction of the Mozhaisk defensive line. This wasn't a leisurely engineering project. It was a desperate race against time, a furious effort to create a physical barrier. However makeshift, that could absorb the German blow. Every available man, every available resource, was thrown into reinforcing this crucial line, understanding that Moscow's fate literally rested on its solidity. The very earth around Moscow became a canvas for this desperate, last-ditch effort, with fortifications and trenches being carved out against the backdrop of the city's grim determination. With Zhukov came an iron discipline, a brutal, unforgiving resolve that brooked no retreat, no weakness. His command echoed Stalin's own chilling order, not one step back. You feel the raw, terrifying power of this directive. It meant exactly what it said: hold the line, no matter the cost in human lives, for those who faltered, for those who showed weakness. The consequences were swift and final. You are made aware of the harsh realities of this unforgiving command. Prisoners, sometimes those already captured and then released or exchanged, and deserters, those who had dared to flee the brutal front, were thrown back into the fighting as cannon fodder, their lives deemed expendable in the face of Moscow's peril. You bear witness to the shocking, brutal reality of this discipline. Soviet officers, operating under Zhukov's unyielding command, did not hesitate. They shot their own men for retreating, for failing to hold their ground, for showing any sign of wavering. The scene is stark, chilling, a testament to the extreme measures taken to instill obedience and unwavering resolve. This was a discipline not born of camaraderie, but forged by fear and by cold, hard steel. It was a terror designed to ensure that the German bullet was often the preferred alternative to the summary execution of one's own side. You hear the grim, dark humor that emerged from this impossible situation. A Red Army joke whispered amongst the soldiers. A bitter truth. Die by German bullets, or die by our own. Moscow, under Zhukov's iron fist, became not just a fortress of earth and stone, but a fortress of blood and iron. Its defense rooted in an absolute, uncompromising will to resist, no matter the human sacrifice. You sense the grim determination, the unflinching resolve that would shape the coming battles, understanding that the city's fate hung by the thinnest of threads, held aloft by sheer, unyielding will. As the military forces prepared, you turn your attention to the beating heart of Moscow itself, where the spirit of defiance was not confined to soldiers in uniform. You witness an astonishing transformation, as the entire civilian population galvanized, turning their city into an active participant in the war effort. The collective will of the people became a tangible force, reshaping daily life into a relentless, desperate struggle for survival and defense. This was not a passive waiting for fate, but an active, visceral engagement with the unfolding tragedy. You see them everywhere. The ordinary citizens of Moscow, now soldiers without uniforms, 250,000 women and teenagers, their hands once perhaps accustomed to household chores or school books, now wield shovels and pickaxes. They dig relentlessly, under the watchful, urgent eyes of engineers and commanders. carving out trenches that snake across the landscape and massive anti-tank ditches designed to trap the enemy's steel beasts. Their faces are grimed with dirt, their muscles ache, their skin roughens and cracks, but they do not stop. It's a monumental physical effort, a testament to their unwavering determination to protect their homes, their families, and their capital. Factories, which just weeks before produced pots and pans, consumer goods, or farming equipment, swiftly pivoted their entire operation. You hear the clang and hiss of repurposed machinery, the hurried chatter of workers, now assembling rifles, forging artillery shells, and manufacturing the myriad necessities of war. The very rhythm of industrial life changed, accelerating to meet the desperate demands of the front. Every rivet hammered, every bullet cast, was a direct contribution to the defense, a desperate hope against the encroaching enemy. The smoke from these factories, once a sign of prosperity, now curled into the cold sky as a defiant plume of industry repurposed for battle. Even the children, usually shielded from the harsh realities of conflict, found themselves caught in the maelstrom. You might glimpse them, small figures darting through the streets, acting as messengers, carrying vital communications between various defense points, their youthful energy repurposed for the grim necessities of war. Women, elderly men, and teenagers, lacking specialized equipment, carried bricks and stones, adding to the growing fortifications, reinforcing barricades, building defenses with their own raw strength. Every individual, it seemed, found a role, a way to contribute to the city's survival. A particularly poignant image might stay with you, that of a young girl. Her face streaked with dirt, her small hands bloody and raw from the relentless digging, clutching a shovel that appears almost larger than herself. Her eyes, however, hold not despair, but a quiet, fierce determination. This is the innocence of youth confronted by the brutal demands of war, yet unyielding. Amidst this grim, exhausting labor, a poignant, dark humor emerges, a way for the civilians to articulate the profound uncertainty of their existence. They say, with a wry, knowing smile, "We dig graves, just not sure if for Germans or ourselves." It's a statement born of profound anxiety, yet it carries a resilience, an acknowledgement of their shared fate. The entire city had indeed turned into an army, united in purpose, its citizens the soldiers, its streets the battleground, each beating heart a testament to an unyielding will to survive. You feel the profound sense of communal spirit, the tragic beauty of a people rising as one against an overwhelming threat. The silence, once again, breaks with a roar. After the delays of Rasputitsa, the German war machine, now with a desperate urgency, smashes into the Mozhaisk defensive line. You are there, in spirit, at the crucible of this confrontation, and the fighting is nothing short of apocalyptic. The air itself seems to tear with the concussive force of artillery, the incessant rattle of machine guns, and the terrifying shriek of Stuka dive bombers. Wave after wave of German infantry and tanks surge forward, their objectives clear, their determination fueled by the belief that this is the final hurdle before Moscow. The Soviet defenders, many of them the raw recruits and hastily organized civilian battalions, stand firm, their orders unequivocal, not one step back. You witness the sheer, unyielding sacrifice. Thousands of Soviets dying, buying precious hours and critical kilometers with their lives. Each fallen soldier represents a moment of delay, A brief pause in the German advance. A tiny victory against overwhelming odds. The ground, already churned by the mud, now becomes saturated with blood, transforming the autumn landscape into a grim tableau of sacrifice. The trenches, painstakingly dug by civilians and soldiers alike, quickly become mass graves, filled with the bodies of those who gave everything to hold the line. The sights and sounds are almost unbearable. You are struck by the sheer volume of corpses, piled high in the trenches, strewn across the fields. The stench, a sickening mix of blood, earth, and gunpowder, becomes a heavy, suffocating blanket over the battlefield. It is a smell that clings to the memory, a grim reminder of the cost of every inch of ground gained or lost. In their desperation, facing overwhelming German assaults, Soviet soldiers resort to unimaginably grim tactics. You witness them, in their last stand, using the fallen bodies of their comrades as makeshift sandbags, piling them up to create a meager shield against the hail of bullets and shrapnel. It is a horrifying, yet profound, act of solidarity. A testament to the fact that even in death, their friends still offered a form of protection. You hear the whispered, dark humor, born of the deepest despair and the most profound loyalty. Our friends still protect us, even in death. It is a chilling phrase that encapsulates the grim realities of their existence. The unbreakable bond forged in the fires of war and the profound, unending sacrifice. Moscow, the prize, the spiritual heart of a nation, now stood just tens of kilometers away, its iconic domes and spires almost visible from the front line. The tension is unbearable. A taut wire stretched between desperate defense and relentless assault. Every explosion, every crack of a rifle, every human cry reverberates with the immense weight of the capital's fate. The Mojaisk line, built from earth and the raw courage of men and women, held, just barely, for crucial days, transforming itself into a symbol of unyielding resistance, a wall of flesh and spirit that defied the German onslaught, but at a cost almost too terrible to comprehend. You feel the immense, quiet tragedy of this sacrifice, a profound understanding of the human cost of protecting a city, a nation, a way of life. As the fighting raged along the Mojaisk line, a new, more formidable presence begins to emerge from the Soviet ranks. A shift in the very balance of combat. You witness the arrival of what the Germans would soon come to call the Red Demons, the T-34 tanks and the Katyusha rocket launchers. These weren't merely new weapons. They were game changers, instruments of war that began to bite back with terrifying effectiveness, changing the psychology of the battlefield. You see the T-34 tanks for the first time, not as technical specifications, but as powerful, almost predatory machines. Their sloped armor, a revolutionary design, allows them to shrug off hits that would cripple earlier tanks. Their powerful 76.2mm guns outclass the cannons on the German Panzer III, giving them a decisive edge in firepower. But it's not just their armor or their guns, it's their wide tracks. You watch as they roll through the same deep, clinging mud that had bogged down the German panzers, navigating the treacherous terrain with a surprising ease. Where German tanks stalled, helpless and vulnerable, the T-34s advanced, their presence a stark, unsettling contrast for the German soldiers who had come to rely on the mud as an ally. The sight of these tanks, seemingly impervious to the conditions that crippled their own, undoubtedly sent a shiver of unease through the German lines. Then, You hear it. A sound unlike any other. A chilling, almost primal scream that heralds destruction. The Katyusha rockets launch, not with the precise crack of artillery, but with a terrifying, wailing howl that builds in intensity as they streak across the sky. It is a sound designed to terrify, to demoralize, and it succeeds spectacularly. You feel the ground tremble beneath you, even from a distance. As these rockets descend in fiery barrages, the impact is devastating, ripping fields apart, tearing through enemy positions, engulfing entire areas in explosions and shrapnel. German soldiers, caught in these unholy salvos, scatter like ants, their formations breaking, their discipline faltering in the face of such overwhelming, indiscriminate destruction. The shock and terror among the German troops are palpable. You hear their desperate, dark humor, a grim attempt to cope with the psychological impact of these new weapons. They call the Katyushas Stalin's rock concert one show, no survivors. It's a cynical joke, a way to acknowledge the sheer, terrifying power of these weapons and the devastating effect they had on their morale. This Soviet arsenal, once seen as inferior, now began to bite back with a ferocity and effectiveness that surprised and disheartened the German forces. The appearance of the T-34s, rolling through the mud, and the terrifying scream of the Katyushas, raining fire from the sky, marked a crucial turning point. It was the moment when the Soviets, despite their immense losses, began to demonstrate their capacity for innovation, their ability to adapt, and their grim determination to turn the tide, piece by painful piece. You sense the shift in momentum, a growing realization that this was no longer a one-sided conflict. As November bled into December, you feel the distinct, creeping chill of the Russian winter. A cold that is not merely uncomfortable, but truly profound, deeply menacing. This winter of 1941 settles in with a vengeance, proving to be among the coldest of the century, a relentless, unforgiving force of nature that becomes an adversary as formidable as any army. The temperature plummets, dropping to an unimaginable 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. You feel it in your bones, a constant, gnawing ache that penetrates through layers of clothing, a cold that seems to suck the very warmth from the world. For the German soldiers, accustomed to milder European winters, this brutal climate becomes an inescapable, agonizing torture. You witness the immediate and devastating effects. Over 100,000 Germans suffer from severe frostbite, a creeping horror that claims fingers, toes, and sometimes entire limbs. Their skin turns pale, then mottled, then black, numb at first, then racked with excruciating pain as the tissues freeze and die. The simple act of exposure, of being caught without adequate protection, becomes a sentence of permanent disfigurement, a slow, agonizing process of loss. You see the desperation in their eyes, the constant battle against the cold. Shivering uncontrollably, huddled together, they desperately try to find warmth in makeshift shelters. In the meager fires they dare to light, only for the bitter wind to snatch away the heat. Their breath plumes in icy clouds. Their faces are raw and wind-burned, their movements stiff and sluggish. The sensory experience is overwhelming the crunch of frozen snow underfoot, the biting wind that whistles through threadbare uniforms, the dull ache in every joint, the constant, gnawing awareness of the cold seeping into their very core. This unrelenting cold is not just a discomfort, it is a weapon, a slow, insidious killer, It weakens the men, saps their morale, and distracts them from their military objectives. Their focus shifts from fighting the enemy to simply surviving the elements. Every breath is a struggle against the freezing air. Every movement an effort against the numbing cold. You feel the profound exhaustion that permeates their ranks. An exhaustion born not just of battle, but of the relentless, energy-draining struggle against the environment. This is a cold that permeates everything. A cold that freezes not just the body, but also the spirit, slowly grinding down their will to fight. You understand, with a chilling clarity, that this was a war against an enemy far older and more powerful than any human army. The brutal cold of the Russian winter spares nothing, and its icy grip extends beyond the human body to embrace the very machinery of war. You witness the mechanical failures, the silent surrender of steel and fuel to the overwhelming power of the elements. German engines, finely tuned for milder climates, freeze solid. The oil within them, once a slick lubricant, turns thick and sluggish, then ultimately congeals into an unyielding jelly. Trying to start a tank or a truck becomes an almost impossible task. A desperate, futile effort against the implacable cold. The once roaring engines now emit only pathetic clicks and groans, if they respond at all, standing as monuments to their own helplessness. Fuel lines crystallize. Diesel fuel turns cloudy and viscous, sometimes even solidifying in the tanks. The elaborate systems that allowed the blitzkrieg to move with such speed become intricate patterns of frozen metal, rendered useless. Tanks and trucks, designed for rapid movement, are now static, heavy blocks of icebound metal, their mobility stolen by the frigid air. The absence of proper winterization equipment, a critical oversight driven by the misplaced belief in a swift victory, now becomes a catastrophic vulnerability. Every piece of equipment, from the smallest rifle to the largest artillery piece, struggles against the cold. Weapons, especially the intricate mechanisms of machine guns and rifles, jam constantly. Grease turns solid, moving parts seize up, and the simple act of firing becomes a perilous gamble. Fingers, numb and stiff from the cold, struggle with triggers and bolts, making precision and rapid response almost impossible. You see the frustration, the desperate attempts to thaw frozen mechanisms with open flames, a dangerous and often futile effort. The very tools of war become unreliable, turning moments of combat into desperate struggles against one's own malfunctioning equipment. Perhaps the most chilling sight of all, though, is the quiet, insidious horror that befalls the soldiers themselves. You might come across them in the trenches, in hastily dug foxholes, or even in the open fields, frozen in their sleep. Their bodies, stiff and stark, remain in the positions they assumed in their last moments, victims of a silent, invisible killer. There are no screams, no sounds of battle, just the profound, unsettling stillness of death by extreme cold. It's a quiet tragedy, a chilling testament to the winter's merciless power. You hear the dark humor again, whispered amongst the survivors, a bleak resignation. Our winter uniform is death itself. The German Wehrmacht, once a proud and seemingly unstoppable force, was slowly, inexorably, becoming a frozen army of corpses in motion, its vitality drained, its spirit chilled to the bone. You witness the slow, agonizing erosion of an army, understanding that the cold was not just an inconvenience, but a profound, existential threat that reshaped the very nature of the conflict. Amidst the deepening cold and the mounting German pressure, On November 7th, 1941, you are drawn to a remarkable, almost unbelievable spectacle in Moscow. This is the day of the annual Red Square Parade, a traditional commemoration of the October Revolution. But this year, the context is utterly transformed, imbued with a desperate, defiant significance. Despite the German forces being within miles of the city, despite the grim reality of the front line, Stalin makes a colossal, audacious decision: the parade will proceed. It is a gamble, a performance of unwavering resolve designed to shock, inspire, and defy. You stand there, or perhaps you merely witness, as soldiers march with grim determination across the cobblestones of Red Square. These are not just ceremonial troops. Many of them are battle-hardened veterans, and many more are fresh recruits, their faces set with a mixture of apprehension and pride. The symbolism is profound and chilling these soldiers, after marching in a display of Soviet strength, will not return to barracks. Instead, you see them turn, their columns marching directly from the parade ground to the very front lines, often within sight and sound of the enemy's guns. The tanks that rumble across the square, bedecked for the parade, are not just props. They are destined for immediate combat, their treads already caked with the mud of battle. Stalin himself stands on Lenin's mausoleum, his voice ringing out across the vast square, amplified and carried by radio waves across the embattled nation. You hear his powerful roar, a defiant declaration that pierces through the grim atmosphere: Moscow will never fall. It is a message intended not just for the troops assembled before him, but for every Soviet citizen, every German soldier listening in, and indeed, for the entire world. It is a statement of unyielding will, an act of sheer, unparalleled audacity in the face of imminent catastrophe. The tension is almost unbearable, a knife-edge balance between celebration and potential disaster. You witness the dramatic juxtaposition: tanks rolling through the freshly fallen snow of Red Square, their cannons gleaming, while in the distance, the dull, concussive thud of German bombs echoes outside the city limits. The sounds are a constant, chilling reminder of the proximity of the enemy, of the desperate stakes involved. Yet, the parade continues, a defiant display of life, order, and purpose in the face of chaos. Amidst the solemnity and the palpable danger, the dark humor of the Muscovites, that ever-present coping mechanism, finds its way to your ears. They joke, with a grim, knowing smile. Today, a parade. Tomorrow, a funeral. It's a stark, cynical reflection of their reality. Yet it also carries a deep, powerful current of resilience, an acknowledgement of their shared fate and their unyielding spirit. This parade, against all odds, sends a powerful morale shockwave across the Soviet Union. It transforms despair into a renewed sense of purpose, demonstrating to friend and foe alike that Moscow and the Soviet Union would not break, would not surrender, and would fight to the very last breath. You feel the profound impact of this moment, a quiet understanding of how symbolic acts can galvanize an entire nation in its darkest hour. As the battle for Moscow raged and the German advance stalled, a crucial, covert intelligence coup was unfolding. Far from the frozen trenches, you are privy to the subtle threads of this strategic turning point. The Soviet spy, Richard Sorg, operating deep within Japanese-held territory, confirmed the intelligence that would alter the course of the battle. Japan would not attack Siberia. This was a critical piece of information, a strategic gift that unlocked a vast, hidden resource for the beleaguered Soviet defense. The sigh of relief, though silent, must have been immense. With this assurance, Stalin moved decisively, orchestrating a monumental strategic transfer. You envision the movement, a vast, secret redeployment across thousands of miles of frozen landscape. 30 elite Soviet divisions, stationed in the Far East to guard against a potential Japanese invasion, were now freed. These were not just any troops. They were hardened, seasoned soldiers, accustomed to the brutal extremes of the Siberian winter, trained specifically for warfare in unforgiving cold. They began their long, arduous journey westward, a silent, powerful force moving to the rescue of the capital. When they finally arrived at the front lines around Moscow, they were a sight to behold, a stark contrast to the weary, frost-bitten German soldiers. These were ski troops, winter specialists, bundled in thick, white fur greatcoats, blending seamlessly with the snowy landscape. You might see them emerge from the swirling blizzards, ghostly figures gliding silently on skis, their faces grim, their movements fluid and purposeful. They were experts in winter camouflage, in navigating the deep snows, in fighting in conditions that crippled the German war machine. Their arrival was not merely a numerical reinforcement, but a psychological and tactical game-changer. You witness their devastating impact, emerging from the swirling snow, almost like apparitions. They would spray German positions with machine gun fire, conduct lightning-fast raids, and vanish back into the whiteout before the shocked Germans could react. They were trained for this, equipped for this, and they operated with a chilling efficiency that was utterly demoralizing for the unprepared German troops. The whispers among the German ranks are almost fearful, a mixture of awe and terror. They call them, with a touch of dark humor and growing dread, the abominable snowman with rifles. It's a reflection of their ghostly appearance, their silent approach, and their deadly effectiveness. This covertly acquired intelligence, and the subsequent deployment of these formidable Siberian ghosts, became Stalin's secret card, a powerful, unexpected force that began to turn the tide, slowly but surely, against the exhausted and freezing German invaders. You feel the profound shift in momentum, a quiet certainty that the balance of power, once so firmly in German hands, was now beginning to tilt, irrevocably, towards the Soviet defenders. As November draws to a close, a moment of profound, bitter irony unfolds. You are drawn to the German front lines, to the positions of their most advanced units. Despite the mud, despite the cold, despite the increasing resistance. Some German reconnaissance elements and advance patrols managed to push agonizingly close to Moscow. They reached within 6 to 9 miles of the city's heart, a distance that, in any other campaign, would have meant certain victory. You can almost feel the surge of desperate hope, the final push of adrenaline in their veins. Through their binoculars, aimed across the frozen, snow-dusted landscape, they saw the iconic, onion-domed towers of the Kremlin, glimmering faintly in the distance. It was a tantalizing, almost unbearable sight. The prize of prizes, the symbol of everything they had fought for, now laid out before them. You imagine the mix of emotions that must have coursed through their veins: elation, exhaustion, and a sudden, terrible realization. They were there, within sight, yet utterly, absolutely, devastatingly unreachable. The physical distance was tiny, but the gap between their position and the city walls was an unbridgeable chasm of logistical collapse and human endurance. The grim reality of their situation became devastatingly clear. Fuel, that lifeblood of the Blitzkrieg, had simply run out. The trucks and tanks that had carried them so far were now stalled, silent monuments to their own immobility, frozen into the snow and mud. Their engines, if they could even be started in the sub-zero temperatures, had nothing to consume. Without fuel, the mighty panzer divisions were little more than static emplacements, vulnerable and cold, and the men themselves, pushed beyond the limits of human endurance, simply collapsed. Starvation, frostbite, and sheer exhaustion had taken their final, terrible toll. You witnessed the starving soldiers, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow with fatigue and hunger, staring fixedly at the city they could never touch. Their breath plumed in the freezing air, their bodies shivering uncontrollably, yet their gaze remained locked on the Kremlin towers, a silent testament to their desperate, unfulfilled ambition. You hear the dark humor, delivered with a sigh of bitter resignation. It's like holding a postcard, cold and far. It's a poignant, heartbreaking joke, capturing the cruel proximity of their objective and the absolute, insurmountable distance that separated them from it. Moscow was in sight, a shimmering mirage of victory, yet it remained eternally unreachable, a cruel testament to the overextension of their lines, the ferocity of the Soviet defense, and the devastating power of the Russian winter. You feel the profound sense of defeat in that moment, a quiet understanding that the dream of a swift conquest had finally, definitively, frozen solid. The air, heavy with the cold and the stench of attrition, suddenly crackles with a new, urgent energy. On December 5th, with the German forces utterly exhausted, frozen, and at their absolute breaking point, General Zhukov unleashed his massive counterattack. You feel the surge, the sudden, powerful shift in momentum that reverberates across the entire front. This was not a tentative probing. This was a thunderous, coordinated assault, designed to exploit every German weakness, to turn the tide decisively. The timing was masterful, exploiting the absolute nadir of German strength and morale. The German soldiers, already weakened by the cold and the grueling, protracted fighting, were utterly shocked. They had been led to believe that the Soviets were on their last legs, that victory was within grasp, however bitter the cost, but instead, a fresh, powerful wave of Soviet forces, many of them the Siberian specialists, equipped and trained for winter warfare, came crashing down upon them. Wow. You witness the chaos that erupts in the German lines, their formations, already fragile, break and scatter. What little order remained dissolves into a desperate, confused retreat. The hunters had suddenly become the hunted. The counterattack gained ground rapidly, sweeping across the snow-covered fields that had so recently witnessed German advances. You see the Soviet forces retaking towns and villages that had fallen into German hands just weeks before. Each recaptured settlement is a small, symbolic victory, a reversal of fortune that boosts Soviet morale and further saps the German will to fight. The Red Army, once forced into a desperate retreat, now advanced, driven by a fierce determination, bolstered by the sight of their enemy faltering. The earth, once stained by Soviet blood, was now reclaimed, inch by painful inch. The retreat of the Germans is not orderly. It is a desperate scramble for survival. You witness the shocking sight of retreating Germans abandoning their heavy weapons in the snow. Tanks, artillery pieces, machine guns, valuable equipment, indispensable in battle, are left behind. Too heavy to move quickly, too frozen to operate effectively. It is a clear sign of their desperation, their flight from the relentless Soviet push. The dark humor, once a German coping mechanism, now shifts to the Soviet side. You hear Red Army soldiers, their voices filled with renewed vigor and triumph, shouting across the snowy fields, "Run faster, it keeps you warm." It's a taunt, a psychological weapon, rubbing salt into the raw wounds of the retreating enemy. The momentum had shifted, definitively, in mere days. The long, agonizing siege of Moscow was ending. Not in capitulation, but in a powerful, unexpected counterblow that sent the once invincible German war machine reeling backward. You feel the immense release, the quiet triumph, as the narrative of this brutal battle pivots, a profound turning of the tide. As the Soviet counteroffensive gained strength, another critical aspect of the German war machine began to crumble, not under enemy fire, but under the relentless, silent assault of the winter. You witness the crippling of the Luftwaffe, Germany's once dominant air force, the extreme freezing temperatures, a persistent adversary, grounded vast numbers of their aircraft. You see Messerschmitts and Stukas, once lords of the sky, now frozen solid on the runways, their metal wings encased in ice, their engines refusing to turn over. They appear like magnificent, but lifeless. Steel coffins, unable to take flight, rendered utterly useless by the cold. Pilots, desperate to keep their machines operational, resort to extreme measures. You might see them burning tires beneath the engines, a dangerous and crude attempt to generate enough heat to thaw the lubricants and fuel lines. But often, it's a futile effort, a desperate struggle against an insurmountable foe. The air superiority that had been a hallmark of the Blitzkrieg, providing vital reconnaissance and close air support, simply evaporated. German ground troops, already reeling from the Soviet counterattack and the brutal cold, were now left entirely without air cover. The terrifying scream of the Stukas, once a harbinger of doom for the Soviets, was now replaced by an eerie, vulnerable silence, leaving the German soldiers exposed to the full, relentless force of the Red Army. You hear the pilots themselves, with a grim, defeated humor, joking. We fly only in our imagination. Their power, their purpose, had melted away in the snow and ice. Far from the frozen front, in his remote headquarters, the news of the collapsing front and the grounded Luftwaffe ignited a furious, terrifying rage in Hitler. You sense the raw, uncontrolled anger emanating from him, an almost palpable wave of fury. He was accustomed to victory, to unquestioning obedience, and this catastrophic reversal was anathema to him. Rather than acknowledging the immense, strategic errors of his own making the failure to equip his army for winter, the underestimation of Soviet resilience, the overextension of his lines, he lashed out, dismissing generals in droves. Accusations of incompetence, of cowardice, of insubordination filled the air as he desperately sought scapegoats for the unfolding disaster. You might visualize the maps in his war room, not as strategic tools, but as objects of his wrath, torn by his fists during his furious rants. This irrational, destructive anger had a devastating impact on the German command structure. Morale plummeted among the officers, who now feared not just the enemy, but the unpredictable rage of their own leader. Confusion spread through the ranks as experienced commanders were replaced by loyalists, often less capable. You hear the quiet, bitter whispers among the officers, a new form of dark humor, a grim realization: we lost to mud, not to Stalin. It was an acknowledgement that the true adversaries had been the unforgiving elements and the profound underestimation of the Soviet will. These internal cracks, born of hubris and sustained by rage, deepened Germany's failure, guaranteeing that the retreat from Moscow would be not just a tactical withdrawal, but a strategic and psychological defeat of immense proportions. You feel the profound sense of disarray, the unraveling of a once mighty war machine. As the German forces finally, bitterly retreated, broken by the combination of fierce Soviet resistance and the relentless winter, you witness the profound, quiet triumph Moscow still stood. The capital, once besieged, once seemingly on the brink of collapse, had endured. Its iconic Kremlin, now lit against the snowy, blood-stained skies, became a defiant beacon, a symbol of unyielding national will. You sense the immense relief, the profound sense of accomplishment that washes over the Soviet people. Stalin, who had remained steadfast in the city, was now hailed, not just by propaganda, but by the genuine belief of his people, as the man who had saved Russia. His image, once fearsome, now carried the weight of a defender, a savior in the nation's darkest hour. The dark humor of the Soviet troops, once laced with grim resignation, now resonates with a triumphant, if still somber, edge. You hear them singing, perhaps softly at first, then with growing confidence. Moscow doesn't sleep, but Germans sleep forever. It's a stark, powerful declaration of victory, a testament to their endurance and the price paid by their foe. Moscow's survival, however, came at an almost unimaginable human cost, a price etched forever into the frozen landscape. Soviet losses were staggering, estimated at anywhere from 600,000 to 1.3 million killed, wounded, or captured. These numbers represent an ocean of human suffering, individual lives extinguished in the defense of their homeland. The German losses, though fewer, were still immense, estimated between 250,000 and 400,000 men. Death, a silent, all-encompassing blanket, covered the vast, frozen countryside, a grim testament to the ferocity of the battle. You are confronted with the horrifying imagery fields of snow, once pristine white, now stained crimson with the frozen corpses of soldiers from both sides. It is a stark, brutal landscape, a testament to the immense human sacrifice. The dark humor on the Soviet side, though victorious, still acknowledges this terrible price. This winter, red is not just the color of our flag. It's a sobering reminder that victory, even the most profound, often comes soaked in blood. Moscow was saved, but it was saved by mountains of bodies, by an ocean of sacrifice, a testament to the willingness of a nation to endure the unendurable. With the German retreat, the dream of blitzkrieg was definitively shattered. You understand that the Wehrmacht had lost its seemingly unstoppable momentum, its aura of invincibility. Moscow became the first great German defeat of World War II, a turning point that reverberated across the globe. It proved that the German army was not invincible, that they could be stopped, even driven back. The maps, once adorned with confident German arrows, now showed those arrows broken, shattered like brittle bones in the harsh winter. The dark humor on the German side, now tinged with bitter reflection, acknowledged the truth. We didn't lose to Stalin, we lost to winter and mud. This defeat at Moscow irrevocably altered the course of the Eastern Front, transforming it from a swift war of conquest into a grinding, brutal war of attrition, a war that Germany, unprepared for such a prolonged struggle, could not hope to win. Moscow stood, a monument to resilience, and a harbinger of the long, devastating road that lay ahead. You feel the profound weight of this historical turning point, a quiet understanding of how the fate of an empire can be forged or broken in the icy grip of winter.